Okay, good afternoon. My name is Kibuitsi Machangana, as I've already been introduced. And the panelists also have been introduced in case you didn't know who is who. From my far right is Mr. Yves Latem, who is the Secretary General of International IDEA and former Prime Minister of Belgium. And to my near right is Honorable Lawrence Gonzi, former Prime Minister of Malta. And to my immediate left is Dr. Irato Gazon Markoulis, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, former Foreign Minister of Cyprus. And to my far left is Honorable Haldo Asgrimsson, former Prime Minister of Iceland. The topic of our discussion this afternoon is titled The Future of Political Parties in the Context of Citizen Protest Movements. How can political parties respond? And in this panel discussion, what we will be looking for would be the perspectives and opinions of the panelists from their experiences as politicians and as members of political parties. A lot of research between the relationship between citizen movements and political parties has been done in recent times, but a lot of it done mainly from the perspective of citizen movements. So I think this is one of those rare opportunities where we will hear from the perspectives of politicians and political parties. Just in terms of the process of how this is going to work, I'm going to be fielding questions for perhaps 30 minutes to the panelists to give their perspectives, and then I will open the floor for discussion, for comments and feedback. I think this morning, the whole day, we have been hearing a lot of statements, and I think this will be a great opportunity for all of you to also be able to make reflections on this particular topic. Just by way of introduction, political parties are the cornerstone of representative democracy. Yet, political parties are said to be the weakest link of democracy. I don't know if the panelists will agree with me on this one. And also the least trusted of all democratic institutions. The rise of citizen protest movements, or what in other places is called social movements, is seen as an indicator that citizens or people around the world don't think that political parties have a role to play in representing their interests. Just to share some of the statistics or some of the facts about both political parties as well as citizen protest movements. Globally, the number of protest movements increased from 59 in 2006 to 112 in just 6 months of 2013. And this is not counting the one that happened last week in Burkina Faso and Belgium. This excludes those. And in its World in 2014 report, the Economist estimated that 43% of the countries in the world remain at high or very high risk of social unrest. And you are probably also aware that according to the Fragile States Index, 83% of the world's population lives in fragile states, which means it's most of us sitting in this room today. When it comes to voter turnout, especially with the focus in Europe, voter turnout in Europe fell steadily from an average of 80% in the mid-1980s to 61% in 2012. In Asia, the decrease has been taking place since the late 1990s, from an average of 70% of eligible voters in 1999 to an average of close to 53% in 2013. Party memberships has also halved in Europe since 1980, and public trust in political parties is the lowest among democratic institutions. For example, when compared to governments, parliaments, the press, and other institutions, the political parties are actually at the bottom of the pile. in terms of trust. And the average age of party memberships in Western Europe is often between 55 and 65, which means that the young are not necessarily members of political parties. So I would like to start first with you, Mr. Latem, and this is a question to all of you. Just your reflections of whether do you really agree with this statement that political parties, the future of political parties is under threat in view of the fact that there is a rise in social protest movements which are bypassing political parties. Is this your view? Why or why not?
I think that, to be very brief and to open discussion, I think that the political parties in their old-fashioned way of functioning are under threat. What is a political party? A political party is an interface between citizens and between the representatives in a democracy and the leadership of a country, the people that govern a country on behalf of the people. To organize elections, you need candidates lists. You, in best of all cases, and it's a little bit with irony that I say it, you need a program, you need ideas, and you have to have communications and campaigning. These are core activities of political parties. These will, I think, never disappear unless you abolish representative democracy. I think that part of the activities of political parties will always be present in democracy. What is, I think, at stake is the more comprehensive, the more global range of activities that political parties perform. For instance, civic education, political training, training about policy, more global engagement in society always went for a part through political parties. I think there that especially new generations, but also the generations that are in power now, have through social media, through all the kinds of ICT means they have now other opportunities to express themselves, to learn about society, to read, than through a political party. And I think that these kinds of activities will diminish in importance. So this is from an organizational point of view. I think that the political parties are under pressure. Besides that, also in sense of what is the credibility of the political parties, and are people prepared to stay loyal to political parties? There, I think there is indeed a very important problem. You gave us some figures about voter turnout. I think besides that, the lack of delivery and the mismatch between programs, what political parties are proposing or kind of promising sometimes during electoral campaigns on the one hand, and on the other hand, the lack of delivery when it comes to results of policies, what exactly is decided. In a very complex society, this is a widening gap. To end just one additional statement, I think that the pressure on political parties is to a very important extent related also to the new generations, the younger people, and how they look at political parties. And there, of course, there is an enormous lack of delivery in terms of how do politicians at this very moment prove to be able themselves to solve the problems of the younger generations. And when they are thinking about the younger generations, do political parties, do leaders show enough sincereness in the way they look at young generations? To conclude with a quite provocative example, Lawrence and I, and maybe other colleagues in the room here, we've been part of the Council of Heads of States and Heads of Government of the European Union. And I know, Lawrence, that in our time already the unemployment of young people and the problems of younger generations were at the core of our discussions. But when you look at what happened during the last months on the European level, we've had a campaign for European elections where there was a lot of debate about the problems of young people. For instance, in the labor markets in the southern part of Europe. And when a couple of weeks ago I saw the Jean-Claude Juncker Commission, who was an excellent colleague and a good friend, when you see that commission of 28 people, and my son last week in Antwerp having dinner was asking me, Dad, who is in charge of the problems of young people in that group of excellent politicians? And what is in for me as a 25 years old young guy? I had it hard to answer. And so that kind of mismatch, that kind of gap between expectancies that are raised on the one hand and on the other hand delivery is especially a problem in terms of the younger generations and political parties.
Thank you, Mr. Latem, for those insightful remarks. Honorable Gonzi, what's your view? Do you think that the future of political parties is under threat in light of the rise of citizen movements?
Yes, I think that the circumstances are changing dramatically. And the changes that are taking place in some instances are so far-reaching in their impact that political parties are, in most cases, finding it difficult to cope. Now, I'll say two things in brief, but this might apply to some countries, not to all. My background is an island state of 400,000 people. At elections, our turnout are 92%. But of course, in a small country and a well-organized political party, you can get a strong turnout. But I have noticed two things. They might apply to your countries, they might not apply at all. First, 20, 30 years ago, it was clear the distinction between one party and another, the ideology and ideological boundaries between parties was so clear, so obvious, that it was easy for people to make a choice. You had the left and the right. I come from a party which is a Christian Democrat party. And we have in Malta another big party, which is a socialist party. But it was clear for a long number of years that there were two separate, distinct, different approaches to economy, to constitutional issues, to democratic issues, clear. In recent years, this divide has diminished dramatically. And both parties are now overlapping in a lot of issues. In the economy, in the liberalization of trade, in the opening of barriers, in removing protectionism, in making social rights open to all, and in so many other things. So my first point is, one danger that political parties are facing today is the fact that the distinction, the difference between political parties is not as evident as it used to be. That might be a good thing in a sense, but it is creating a major issue for political parties in some countries because it needs a very deep examination of what does the party exactly stand for today. The second point is that technology is changing the rules of the game. Malta is very close to the North African coast. So we were witnesses, we were in a sense very close spectators of what was happening during the Arab Spring. We saw what started in Tunisia and then moved into Egypt and then eventually into Libya. Social media took a role which was a lot stronger than any political party could have possibly done. And the reality today in all economies, in Europe, but even beyond Europe, is that social media itself is giving the freedom to individuals to communicate to each other and short-circuit the system, avoid the political party. And now, all you have to do is organize yourself on Facebook, and you send out a message, and this weekend, I think it was this weekend, thousands of protesters went in London to make a point simply because somebody circulated a message on social media. Now, how does a political party answer to that? I propose that political parties have to make full use of technology and the method of social media in order to communicate a lot more, especially with the sector of our population which Yves has just referred to in his final conclusion, and I will conclude with my reflection on this point, with the young people. Young people are feeling today that political parties are not giving the answers. Political parties are saying a lot of nice things, but then the delivery of the results to make a difference in the life of young people is not there. The issue of unemployment and the issue of young people who spend the best time of their lives studying in our schools, in our universities, and then graduating and not finding employment is creating enormous frustration. And unless we all realize as political parties that we need to find concrete answers to this, then the chances are that the distancing of the electorate, especially the young people, and the citizens from the political parties will continue to grow. So there is a danger, yes, there is a threat.
Thank you very much, Honorable Gonzi. And Dr. Erato Kazakoi Makulis. It's difficult for me to pronounce. Makulis. Just to pick up on what Honorable Gonzi and Mr. Latem said, the future of political parties. If it is indeed true, and you agree with Mr. Gonzi, for example, that the ideological differences are becoming blurred between political parties, what then is the future of political parties?
I would agree with both my colleagues on the panel and agree with you in your introductory statement that the political parties are the cornerstone of democracy. So we cannot really live without political parties. We cannot have democracies without political parties. But having said that, I would agree that political parties of today would be under threat if they do not transform. And I think transformation and change is what we have seen taking place in many parts of the world. When I say transformation and change, I relate this with the mass protest movements, the political parties should listen very carefully the voices of these protesters, because these protesters, they don't gather in a square just to have fun, or they have some grievances, whether unemployment or other injustices in the society that have been very painful for their own lives. So political parties have to listen to the protesters and have to adjust their policies towards finding solutions to these problems. If they do not do that, either they will lose in the coming elections, and of course, their percentages will diminish. And we have seen this happening in many, many countries where they had, for example, parties that were as strong as 40% of the voters, and following difficulties in the countries and especially economic difficulties and mass demonstrations, demonstration movements, we have seen these political parties shrinking to less than 10%, which is the response of the people towards the failure of these parties to adjust. So I think adjusting and changing and listening to the voices of the protesters is extremely important. It's very obvious that most of these protesters are young people. Young people get more frustrated because they see in their societies so many injustices, especially in countries that are facing economic problems. The unemployment rate in these countries has skyrocketed to more than 40% among youth, reaching almost 50% among young people unemployed. So there is a lot of frustration, there is a lot of anger that results in these massive demonstrations. So there is a deficiency of the society and of the political system in dealing with the problems of young people. Another issue which I want to bring here is the gender equality. Maybe it is not very relevant to what we are discussing, but definitely there is a democratic deficit. The fact that in many countries, the 50% or 51% in some countries of the electorate, of the population, has no place in decision making. So there is a lot of anger, a lot of frustration for this injustice. And young women, young girls, they see that, and there is a lot of protest about this injustice. So political parties have to change their policies towards gender equality, and this is why many countries have introduced quotas, either political party quotas or legislative quotas, in order to correct these injustices. Regarding the ideological sort of merging, I would agree with Prime Minister Gonzi that we have seen in recent years tremendous changes taking place within political parties and moving towards, and this is a part of what I said in the beginning, that political parties are trying to adjust, trying to respond to these protests. So this is, you mentioned also, and I think it's very characteristic about more and more people are not voting. And this is, I think, another form of protest. It's not only going to the streets and protesting, but it's also not participating in the vote, which I am totally against, because you can go there, vote, even with a blank paper, but go there and vote. So democracy is about participation. But these people, and I heard in the news about the elections in the United States, 2/3 of the voters did not vote, did not participate in the vote. So there's a big question here: where is democracy? If people are not participating, I think this is a slap in the face of democracy. So we have to correct that, and we have to see how we can affect these changes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kozau Makulis. Honorable Haldo Askrimson, the future of political parties. Some issues have been raised here about the ability of political parties to respond. Do you think political parties are about to become extinct or not?
Well, I'm not sure I'm the right person to answer that question. I'm a member of a party which will be 100 years old after 2 years, and I have been a member of that party for 50 years, and I have been the chairman and the vice chairman of that party for 26 years. So, of course, I don't believe in democracy without parties. And we have had in my country, we are just saying, if you are not pleased with our parties, you have to form a new party. And that has, of course, been happening. But these new parties in my country, they have not lived for long. They have lived maybe for 4 years, 8 years, and then they have died out. But the main thing is that we have always to meet new challenges. If the parties do not meet new challenges, they will be outdated and they will disappear. For example, when I became a member of parliament in 1974, we were 17 from my group. There was no woman. No woman. Well, we had to change that. We had no woman in government. When I came into government, there was no woman. We had 6 ministers when I became prime minister. We had 6 ministers, and then I said half of them will be women. So we had 3 women and 3 men. Of course, the men were not very pleased, but we had to meet these challenges. And of course, we have to meet the challenges of the needs of the young people. And that is what every party, I think, is trying to do. But a system without parties, I think that is impossible. There will be no democracy, and the parties have to resist. They have to say, of course, the very basis has to be parties. Without them, I think democracy will just disappear. And there will be new parties, and those people who are protesting, they have to organize themselves in some way. They can't just go to the street and protest without taking any responsibility. And the others, the leaders of the parties, they have to tolerate torture. I can remember once a former chairman of my party, he said, well, I don't know this new prime minister very well, but I can see that he tolerates torture very well. And he thought that was a big quality of a leader. And I think that is true, and we have to outlive this resistance. But I am maybe more worried about the participation in elections. For example, in my country, we are used to more than 90%. Now it's down to about 80%. And we are very worried about that. And you can imagine the United States with 1/3. And if it goes down to 20% or something like that, this is something we have to worry very much about. But my answer, we have to meet these new challenges, show more openness, and of course it is of big importance to get the young people involved. Many young people are saying, I'm not interested in politics. I always say to them, you're not interested in politics. Are you interested in life? Because politics is life. If you're interested in living a life, you have to be interested in politics in some way. And if you want to have influence, you have to take part in some way. Okay, if people are not able to participate in the parties can, of course, increase their cooperation with non-governmental organizations. And I think many parties are trying to do that. But to conclude, I'm probably not the best person to answer these questions.
Thank you very much, Honorable Asgrimson. You raised a very important issue of participation. There is actually a view that citizen protest movements are actually participation, and they are good for democracy, and they are good for the renewal of democratic institutions. But what they lack is probably that they don't have a connection to organized political parties. What, in your view, before I give back to Mr. Latem, would be the best way in which political parties and social movements could actually connect? Because as one of the speakers has already said here, Dr. Kazo Makolis has already said, the important thing is to make sure that there is that connection between social movements for parties to listen. It's a form of participation, and others think that it's actually good for the renewal of democratic institutions.
But some of these non-governmental organizations are not democratic. Mm-hmm. Think of Greenpeace. It's not a democratic organization. It's owned by somebody. Mm-hmm. There is no election, so some of these organizations are not democratic. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Latem. When you comment on what you want to follow on, can you also answer the question, how can political parties and social movements connect?
Yeah, but I think Lawrence Gonzi already has pointed out that political parties, if they want to survive, they have to adapt their methods. It's the political parties that will have to adapt themselves to the new world and to the new kind of how the world is functioning. But I would like to add a word to what has been said by the respected colleagues. I think speed and volatility, the evolution, the pace of the evolution in the field of technology, in the field of the way the labor market functions, in the field of, all kinds of domains in daily lives, that speed is so high, that pace is so high, and parties are not well adapted to the pace of evolution, especially democratic parties. Because I remember when I was leading my party, when you have a very fundamental point of view you have to discuss within a party, a multi-level organized party with local sections and regional sections and national leadership, it takes at least a couple of months to discuss a kind of development in society with an impact on policy. And this is a kind of, let's say, speed which is not adapted to the very important high pace speed of developments in the society itself and in the media coverage of what is happening in a society. That's number one. Number two, I think we sometimes as politicians underestimate that in all parts of daily life, in all domains, the so-called life cycle of products, of services, of fashion has shortened. To give you an example, the life cycle of a car, a certain model of a car used to be 5 to 6 years. Now it's 2 to 3 years. And in lots of companies, the products and services they will sell in 3 years are not even invented at this very moment. And then you have and I'm also already a member of my party since lots of decades, so confronted with that reality, on the other side, you have political parties based on an ideology with the problem of diminishing differences between these ideologies and the problems also to renew constantly the fashion, the way their ideology is presented. I think it's a competition it will be very difficult to cope with this, to win that kind of competition, that kind of race between developments in society and the development of your program, your offer to the voters. And we certainly have to change our methods. Just the last word, the vertical integration of political parties is really not adapted anymore to the reality of daily life, where young people want to be involved in a debate about what's happening in the world, and the day after say, well, my mayor should fix what's happening in my own street. So this kind of mingling of all levels of governments, and on the other side, a political party that is very structured based on this difference in competence between different levels of governance. I think this is something we will have to cope with. We are living in a world now of social media with very impulsive, instant debates, and political parties have to adapt their methods to this new reality. But of course, as I said before, and as the colleagues say, the fact that you need an interface between citizens and the time of elections, and to propose candidates, to propose a program, and that the job will be done by an organization, name it political party or name it something else, that will always be the case. So you will always have political party and need political parties. The question will be, what kind of political party is the most adapted to the new realities in societies? And the pace of development, the speed of the ever-changing, let's say, framework in which a political party has to work is, I think, a very, very, very important factor.
Honorable Gonzo, before I open the floor to the audience, one of the views that have been traded around in terms of why the rise of social movements has been that people feel aggrieved and they think that political parties really are just serving their own interest or the personal interest of the people that are in these political parties. What can be done to really clean up the image of political parties so that they can also begin to be trusted once again?
And I think the answer to that is, in a sense, a repeat of what has already been said. The answer is that political parties need to understand that the methods they used to use in previous years are no longer able to keep them close to what is happening in normal people's lives. You know, these protest movements that have cropped up in so many countries, I will generalize. In most cases, not always, but in most cases, they are an eruption of a sentiment of of a large number of people who feel frustrated because their aspirations to as individuals are not being catered for. I'll give an example. in environmental issues. You know, the environment today is of major concern. Last week, we had the presentation of the IPCC report on climate change. Okay, bottom line, there are large numbers of people, most of them young people, who are today a lot more sensitive to environmental issues than ever before. Now, I question whether political parties are answering adequately to this. And I'm not sure that the political parties in their declarations, I'm generalizing, mind, okay? But I'm not sure that political parties are showing that they really understand what the challenges of the planet are, what the challenges of environment is, what are the challenges that affect our daily lives. So I think the most important thing is, will political parties understand that when there are citizen protests out there, very often the protests are justified, and the reasons for that protest are very often valid reasons. Now, the problem, and I won't take long on this point, but this is also vital for us to understand. Until a few years ago, a strong democracy with strong political parties was necessary, because there was no other tool for citizens to be able to bring forward their plans, their aspirations, their choices, their preferences, their priorities. They used to resort to a political party, so an organization that allowed for people to come together under one vision. I'll give you an example. 20 years ago in my country, the issue of membership in the European Union was a major debate. My party was in favor of membership. The other party was against membership. Now, the only way our citizens could express themselves was by joining a political party, taking part in activities of political parties, writing on newspapers with leanings of the political party, participating in debates. That was the only way they could really push for something they wanted or did not want. Today, they don't need that. Today, you go on Facebook and you just make a statement. And that statement is taken up. And if that statement is taken up and the people start to, then it grows and grows and grows. Today, printed media, newspapers, are closing down because people are making a choice to go online. And not just go online, because in the past we used to buy a newspaper, read the newspaper, comment with our family, this is right and this is wrong. Today, you don't buy the newspaper, you blog or you comment on the online version of that newspaper. And then suddenly you see the response going on and on and on, and thousands of people, much more than any. In other words, so that I won't take long, times are changing. They have changed rapidly. And in most cases, political parties are still not coping with the change. And the challenge really for political parties is to adapt to all of this as quickly as possible.
Transform or die, like...
Transform or die.
Exactly.
Yes.
I will come back to you later, but I would like to just take this moment to open the floor to anyone who wants to ask. And when you ask questions, please make it clear to whom you are asking, and perhaps you could just say your name also and which organization you come from. Yes, sir.
The mic. It's not working.
Microphone, they're coming.
I want to comment on the very basic philosophy of democracy to start with. An American philosopher was asked, what is the difference between Republican and Democrats? He said the same as between Pepsi-Cola and Coca-Cola. You have to pay for the both. However, the question is the present Western democracy a reality or merely a political drama? It's insulting to be counted like sheep and animal. 10 animal this side, 9 animal this side, so 10 animal 1. No argument, no reason, no wisdom. 2 ignorants could vote to kill Socrates or Aristotle, and Socrates had to die. That's the basic critique of the present day Western democracy. It is insulting and undignified. However, look at the history of third world countries from Uganda to Pakistan, Nigeria to Rwanda. We take loans from America to hold elections. One party wins, the losers refuse to recognize there is civil war. Many hundreds are killed. Military comes. After 10 years, people want more democracy, more loans, more civil wars. You read the history of 100 countries in the third world, mere Western democracy, it has resulted only in civil wars as a direct consequence of elections. So political parties are part of this drama. The only exception being countries with Western democracy and constitutional monarchy, where above the factioning and fighting political parties, there is a constitutional monarchy which keeps the country united, as happens in United Kingdom in Northern Ireland. But in Pakistan, country was divided into two, directly as a result of elections. So basically, to me, mere Western democracy is a mobocracy. It's a mere drama of destruction, and no positive outcome can come out of it unless there is a permanent political institution like constitutional monarchy above the fighting parties. It's a question to all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, sir, and then, sorry, since I don't know your name, I'll just keep on saying yes, sir, yes, ma'am. And if you can make your questions very clear and succinct, and to whom are you asking the question?
I'm Valdis Zatlis. I'm former president of Latvia. You have answered all questions. Therefore, I want to make a slight statement. I agree that there's no democracy without political parties. That's the end of democracy. Because the protest movements, and let's say the NGOs and political parties, there are three different animals with different behavior, and it will never be another way. Then the second statement is, okay, the Arab Spring proved us that the social media are very effective in political life, but it's only destructive. There's no any positive institutional building example using the social media. That's the next step of what you are talking about. And this was a little bit theoretical discussion. I want to bring an example about the protest movements and political parties. Yes, protest movements can transform into political parties. That's the experience of myself. We had a referendum on the parliament. 28% at that moment was for. That means against the parliament. We have a constitution that it's only the popular vote, no other instruments. I created party on this moment in 2 months before elections. We got 22% in the parliament. But that was a party of protesters. I've got, Christian Democrats, liberals, communists, socialists, all in my party. For 2 years, we were struggling who we are. And we never agreed on what we are. So we had the best program evaluated by the experts for the elections. We fulfilled 80% what we promised in this program. And in these elections of this year, the party doesn't exist anymore. This is a think tank. But what's left? Because this is a positive example that things are not so bad as we are all talking about. There were still 10 people, it's a 10% of previous members of my party elected in this parliament from different other parties. There are still 2 ministers in the government. And if somebody asks, what's your party? I said, a ruling party, because I have 2 ministers in the parliament, not in the government. So maybe this is an example how the protest movements can play a positive role But we had to create the legislation that any protest movement can be transformed into a political party and act in the elections. What's led afterwards, we don't know. But my experience of my country is in any elections, we have a new protest party. It only is a question how many votes they get. So I am optimistic our system of democracy will live long. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, sir, and then at the back, and then here, and then there. Then, yes, and the last one will be that one. Then I will allow the panelists to respond, and then we can take another round.
Thank you. My name is Sobora. I am from the Czech Republic. I have been president of my party. My party came into the existence in 1918. I do agree entirely what you have said about the role of the party. In my view, the problem is the question of the leadership in the parties. And my question to you is, if the political parties take real lessons from the recent election to the European Parliament, why? Because this is the way how to lose the position. Because the elections, they gave us very strong lesson that something that has happened in Europe. And we established commission in the very old way, like nothing has happened. And in my view, the main problem of the new commission is to what extent the commission is capable of winning the elections 2019. Because European Commission is the only European institution. So if the political parties are not capable of reacting to the global change in the mentality, so we will lose the competition with the civic movements. And I am very skeptical that the new elections in 2019 will be dramatically difficult for the old parties because we haven't taken lesson. We did everything in the very old way. I am not going to comment any single member of the commission. Jean-Claude Juncker is a very nice person, but I am very skeptical. And I am devoted to the European integration, to Europe and to EU. It will be a very tough competition. Maybe I am wrong, but I will be happy if you comment this position. So if it is the question of the responsibility of the leadership to answer the real change, it is not the question of the structure, it is not the question of the debate inside the party, but something has happened and the leadership has to react immediately.
Thank you very much. Yes, sir? I think it was, yeah.
I'm Dr. Wuchi from Ghana. I wanted to know whether the panelists, they're all the past politicians. And I wonder why we don't have any current politician. Relating it to the topic, the future of political parties. Is it the past that always determines the future? Good. Now back to my question. No.
Sorry, can you repeat the question and speak a little bit louder because we didn't
get what I said.
No.
I was wondering, the panelists, all of them are past politicians. Is there a way we can mix it up with the current politicians plus the past? Or we just want to decide that past politicians always determine the future of politics? Then back to my question, this is just something I've observed. Where I'm coming from, Africa, we have a trend of votes, which we call regional balanced votes. No matter what you do, you can put a human being and then a stone at a particular region. The people will go and vote for the stone. And any of the panelists can answer this. Electoral fraud. I think nobody touches on that. All right.
Thank you. I think the last one was on electoral fraud.
Yes.
And then the other one was on partisanship. That
Well, we call it in Ghana ethnical voting.
you call it ethnical voting. Okay. Thank you very much. There was a hand here, and then the last one is at the back there.
Thank you very much. My name is Tesh. I'm from South Africa. And I'm very happy because I'm a young person. And I'm delighted that the panelists agree that our anger and our frustration is justified. That makes me feel a little bit better. However, I've got 2-in-1 questions. The first leg of my question is that politicians seem to know their story when they're campaigning or prior to us, encouraging us to vote. Hence, we had a little bit of some trust and we would vote. I'm not encouraging anyone in this room not to vote. Please vote, be a good citizen of your nation. However, I would like to understand from our politicians or ex-politicians, what goes wrong that causes the lack of delivery? If we know what it is, what can we do? What inputs can we suggest or put forward to address the matter? Or should we consider a paradigm shift completely? My second part of the question is, I think being ex-politicians, you have done very well. I do acknowledge that politics are taking a different, or the lifestyles are taking a different direction. We are very advanced now, yes, we tweet, we do all things very fast, but it is all your encouragement, your influence. You have taught us to go to school to be educated, and we are now educated. And clearly, you can see from our frustration that most of the protest is about employment and not having opportunities. And clearly, jobs are not enough for everyone because majority are educated. What can we do? Where do we go now that we are educated? What strategies, what approaches can we forward? What I would like to hear your thoughts that would address this frustration because we all cannot be employed across the nation as young people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The last one for this round at the back.
Good evening, board members and my dear colleagues. I'm overwhelmed to join this discussion because political parties is one of my favorite subjects. So I'm just gonna ask about one thing. Is there any eligibility criteria for the political parties also? Because we have seen in past Nazi party and in India, in the South Asian continent, there are many parties coming up and they don't have eligibility criteria. Educated people are not coming out. So whether the leaders are taking it on right way or wrong way, I'm just having this question only.
Thank you very much to panelists. Honorable Askrimson, do you want to start and pick up the few that you can respond, and then other panelists will also respond?
Well, of course, we can think of doing put something new in our constitutions. I said, I think the very basis are the parties, but of course it is possible. And that has been under discussion in the Nordic countries and in my country. And these measures are also in some of the constitutions that a certain percent of the population can ask for a referendum on a certain question. It is also possible that, I think it is in the Danish constitution, I think it is 60% of the parliament can no, not 60, 40, it is, I think it is 40%, if I remember right, can ask. It is a minority of the parliament that can ask for a referendum on a certain question. But the experience with this, for example, in Denmark, has not been very good. But of course, this is possible to meet skepticism in a way that the political parties say, okay, if you have a certain question, which you would put to a referendum. Let's think of, for example, membership to the European Union. If a majority of a parliament is against membership to the European Union, and then a movement in the country can come and say, we will have a referendum of this, because we think the majority of the people will decide otherwise. Of course, this is possible. But my main answer is that parties have always they have to live up to new challenges. And the main thing is to get the young people more involved. I think that is something we have to very much about, that the young people are not involved in the way I would like to see. I don't have an answer to that, but I think that is one of the main challenges of the political parties. And then the political parties have to be ready to take the young people to more leading roles in the parties, to create more trust among the young people.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kazopoli Makolis. Any questions you want to pick up?
I think there were many questions, but all these questions, I strongly believe they reflect the frustration that exists among citizens from all parts of the world regarding the problems facing their societies. And I believe that these protest movements, the massive protest movements, reflect a certain alienation between the people, between the citizens, between the voters and the political parties. So we have to find ways of initiating dialogues between these masses, these protesters, and the political parties. So dialogue is very important. Opening the doors of the political parties is very important to these protesters, trying to engage them in the dialogue for finding solutions to the different problems. But also I see from the experience of my country, but also observing in other countries, I think people, they need more and more consensus building between the different political parties to solve the many and difficult problems facing societies. So consensus building and moving away from this controversy, which is ever present in our political systems. I think the more there is this effort to converge ideas, to converge policies in order to find solutions, because one political party only cannot find solutions to the problems facing society. So I think this is very important, and unless this happens, I think people will continue to remain alienated. And I fully agree that we have to engage and involve, as Prime Minister of Iceland said, we have to engage the youth. We have to listen to the youth. We have to listen to them and see the real problems that they're facing in society. Without listening to them, without involving them, we cannot find the right solutions for them. And the last thing, it's about the role of the media. We haven't talked about the role of the media, how they are portraying these protest movements. and how helpful they are in bringing together the protesters on the one hand and the political parties on the other hand. I think they can play a very important role in this dialogue between the protesters and the political parties.
Thank you very much, Honorable Gonzi, and I hope that Honorable Gonzi and Mr. Latem, you will also pick up on the question, what happens, why is it that political parties, they make so many promises before elections and then they don't deliver? What happens after?
I'll make three points, I hope, briefly. First, somebody made a comment about ex-politicians. Yeah. Well, you see, we are the living evidence of a strong democracy. I was a prime minister until a year and a half ago. I am no longer a prime minister because there was an election, and the election worked, and people made a choice, and they chose somebody else. So, in a sense, we ex-prime ministers or ex-politicians here today are evidence of a strong democratic process that hopefully continues to remain strong. And that change will come depending on what the electorate, the people, will choose when they are given the opportunity to make a choice. The second point, the young lady, and it would have been a good idea to have a young person sitting here and speaking herself about the interests of young people. But the point that was made was that there are a lot of promises that are made by politicians, and then delivery fails. That is true, and sometimes we politicians make the mistake of promising a lot of things and then find it very difficult to translate those promises in real terms. But in defense of politicians, I must make the point as well that events in the world, again, because of what we were discussing a few minutes ago, changes, technology, etc., events in the world sometimes force you to change your plans. We have just lived through 5 years of the worst economic and financial crisis in these past 100 years. And it's as if we talk as if as if nothing happened. When I contested the elections 10 years ago, nobody told me that I eventually would become prime minister and then in 5 years' time face the worst crisis ever. Nobody had told me that suddenly all the factories in Malta employing thousands of young people, with all the difficulties of young people who bought a house and are in a loan and they have to pay the loan, and then suddenly the factory in Malta loses the orders in Germany because there is an economic crisis, and the factory has no orders, and the factory tells those young people, I'm sorry, you are redundant, go back home. So I do not want to defend politicians who make false promises, but I have to make the point that the world and the economies change, and there has to be the realization that sometimes the plans you have don't work out because the circumstances change. This is the problem that Europe is facing now. There are millions of unemployed in Europe, millions. And the largest group of those millions are young people. So what is the answer to that? And if I may, I am afraid that the answer is that some difficult decisions need to be taken, unpopular decisions. In other words, decisions that will see more ex-politicians come to these type of meetings. I once remember Jean-Claude Juncker, I will finish in 2 seconds, Jean-Claude Juncker saying, a close friend of ours, saying that when there is a crisis and the economy goes wrong and there's a lot of unemployment, all the politicians know what has to be done, but then they don't know how to win the next election. That's the problem. Because to solve the problem, you need to take decisions which are not popular. They will make you lose the election next time. Because you need to restructure the public sector, you need to tell people that you cannot employ with the government anymore, you need to tell people that all the perks and all the conditions that we used to accept until 10 years ago are no longer sustainable. You need to take a lot of difficult decisions. And the countries that have faced austerity measures, are, in other words, saying they had to take difficult decisions. Finally, the last point, which I must make, because we have this conference has been called to celebrate something. And when we talk about politics, please, let us remind ourselves that what we are celebrating is the success of politics. It was politics that brought Europe out of hundreds of years of wars because of dictators, because of authoritarian politicians, because there wasn't democracy. And it was thanks to the democratic process. It was thanks to political parties. It was thanks to politicians who had a vision, a long-term vision, that we saw Europe come together, that we saw a new history being written for human nature, and that 25 years ago, we saw another phase of that, which was the fall of the Berlin Wall, which was the reunification, not just of Germany, but the reunification of the whole of Europe. So let us celebrate something which is positive related to politics, and not just always grumble about the negative part of politics. Well, in reality, politics is beautiful, and I hope that one day young people such as yourselves will take a frontline position in taking part and making things change for your country and for yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzi.
I thought what Lawrence was just saying would be a very good close for this debate, but since you asked me to say something, maybe adding to what Mr. Gonzi has said, we're here in Berlin, and 25 years ago, the wall came down, and in all places that were formerly part of the Soviet Union and of Eastern Europe, with a economy led by politicians, that collapsed, and Fukuyama wrote his book, The End of History. And there was a kind of consensus that to shape the economy, it's not the politicians that create jobs. It's not the politicians that create added value. It's not the politicians that create welfare. We all acknowledge this, including the people in the eastern part of Europe had to be confronted with this, but there was a kind of consensus. The problem being, if I am allowed to take an image here in, a comparison, to make a comparison in Germany, we decided that indeed in a football game, it is the players that score the goals, and it's the referee to look upon the respect for the rules. The misunderstanding is that because of the competition through elections, lots of politicians are forced to say that themselves score the goals. It's in terms of the problem of the unemployment of young people. Of course, there are publicly sponsored and financed programs to put them temporarily in a job and so on. But fundamentally, it is the companies, it is the private sector that fixes the economy, that makes the economy go again. You can have some monetary policy, you can have conditions in terms of education, vocational training, and so on, but at the end, it's the companies that have to create jobs. And so, you know, this country that has an excellent leader, that has an image of maybe the one single country that addressed the problems in the right way, I can tell you, this country is going in a recession. In a couple of weeks, it will appear that once again, for the second or third quarter in a row, Germany has not any growth anymore. So technically spoken, Germany is almost in a recession. And that's not the fault of Mrs. Merkel. And it's not only the fact, the positive side is not only the responsibility of the record of Mr. Schröder. It is just a fact of life that lots of domains, and I can give you other examples, in other parts of daily life than the economy, that we have to face reality, that people themselves, the private sector, that private actors have a lot of responsibility and maybe more than public authority can deliver. The problem being that in lots of countries still political parties, politicians are forced because of that competition to say we will fix the problem, we will score the goal. And even in the country of the world champion football, it's not Mrs. Merkel that scores the goal, it's the private sector. And so it is also the responsibility of voters, including you as a young voter, to make a distinction with the education you have, to make a distinction between, on the one hand, politicians that promise you to score goals, to create jobs, and to know that the people that promise you that are not able to fulfill their promises, to stick to their promises, and to choose for people that are telling you the truth and say, well, we will do all we can to create better conditions, and we will take on board your problems, also as young people, and try to improve education, try to improve training, try to improve the chances of access to education and involvement in society. But at the end, we have to be honest. We maybe will go through a period of crisis before the conditions will be better.
Thank you very much. I'm not going to open the floor again because we have run out of time, but I will just wrap up by saying that my takeaway from this discussion is that we cannot have representative democracy without political parties. Even the example that was given here about social movements transforming into political parties, I think they are a very good example of the fact that at the end of the day, social movements, if they want to make policy, they still have to also transform into political parties. And I think it's very clear that political parties do actually realize that they either have to transform or die. They have to be agile, they have to be able to respond and to listen to social movements, otherwise they die. So I believe that we will soon see something transforming in the realm of political parties and political party memberships. And also I think a key point for me was also the issue of initiating dialogues and building consensus, that no one political party can ever deal with national issues on its own. So more and more as we see the divide between ideologies blaring, that's a signal that political parties need to talk more, they need to come together to address national issues of concern. And that also, political parties' performance is also affected by other factors or external environments that they don't have control over. So I think perhaps this is also an area where political parties need to start educating citizens about that. Of course, we are promising, but at the end of the day, we live in a globalized world where sometimes we don't control the markets, we don't control the prices. There are many other factors that we may not have control over. I just want to take this opportunity to thank you all for the time and your reflections in this, and thank the audience also for the time. I know it's been a long day. Thank you very much for having kept up with us. Thank you.